So for this photo, I will be evaluating and critiquing what I see here for this narrative photo. So just to start out, again, in this photo, I believe the first thing that jumps out to me is that it's in black and white. So there's a lack of color here, which I think is very purposeful by the photographer. I think that they're doing this to hopefully achieve a message that they want their narrative to come across. And I do think that the lack of color is actually effective here. Um, it's it makes the situation that we're seeing seem very stark or blunt, something that doesn't need a lot of sugarcoating, perhaps. We can see that the lack of color makes it also look kind of cold. The picture looks somewhat cold because of the lack of color. Now, also on the floor, on the hardwood floor, you can see the lines throughout the panels, and I actually think that this might not have been purposeful, but I think the lines in the hardwood actually give us somewhat of a line that our eyes follow to travel up the picture. So we start at the very bottom with this box of Miller High Life beer. We travel up the line to cans of beer stacked on each other, and then some more laying on the ground. And then we come across a very dark shoe, and behind that seems to be an empty bottle of liquor. And then finally we get to the young kid that looks to be praying at maybe their father's feet. So I think that perhaps not purposefully, but I think the lines on the hardwood are actually being effectively used to travel throughout this photo and to tell the narrative of what's going on here. Um, Also, the use of space here, I think that the top half of the photo is very filled. We have the man laying on the couch. He's holding a couple things in his hands, and then we have the younger person praying at his feet. We have a bookshelf in the background, another shelf behind the other person. But then in the foreground, we have open space. We have the floor, and it contains a lot of what looks to be empty cans of beers and a shoe. But other than that, there's not a lot there. So there's a little bit of contrast between usage of space in the background and foreground of the photos. And I think that's very interesting. So I believe this photo is about vices, and I think that the narrative that we're trying to get across in this photo is that the dad or the man in this photo perhaps is an alcoholic, and he has drank way too much. Again, you can see by his glasses that he was too drunk to take those off. So he's fallen asleep with his glasses on, and now they're crooked. And if you look in his right hand, he's actually still holding a bottle. And that indicates to me that he has a hard time putting it down, which makes me believe that he's an alcoholic. Um, he's holding something in his left hand, but I'm not sure what that is. You can also tell by all of the cans on the floor that this man obviously has drank too much, and perhaps that's a pattern. Um, However, the person kneeling and praying is really what I'm getting the story of, that this happens often, because to me this looks like the person is praying at the person's feet, praying that they'll stop, that they'll not do this anymore, that they'll get out of their bad habits or their vices. So I think the combination of the man asleep with a bottle in his hand on the couch and the other person praying at his feet, that this has obviously happened before and that it needs to stop because it's a problem. So I think the narrative that the photographer was trying to get across is definitely achieved in this photo. I think that everything being placed on the floor and in the hands is very purposeful, and I really appreciate the way that all the objects are being used to push the narrative here. So, one thing I would change, I would maybe try and clean up the background. For example, the shelf behind the person kneeling looks a little cluttered or dirty, and there's a wire going up that we don't really know what any of that is or what it leads to, and I don't think that it is being as purposefully used as the other objects in the photos. So, I think that would be one thing I would change, is I would maybe take those two bookshelves completely out of the photo, if at all possible, because I do think that Without those, this is a very powerful photo that tells a great story, but with them, it might distract from the message or the story that we're trying to see here. And then an improvement, I would suggest perhaps the thing that's in the left hand, I really can't tell what it is, perhaps prop it up so we could see what it is. I'm sure like everything else, it's very purposeful and it has meaning, and I would really like to see that in the photo to get the full effect of it. So that's one thing I would improve. Um, but as far as elements, I would perhaps just maybe try a different angle, just play around with what it looks like looking straight down on the man, perhaps like from a bird's eye view or like God's eye view looking down on this man indulging in his vices. I think that would tell a very interesting story, and we would be able to cut out the bookshelves and get a better look at what's in the left hand.